It was 3 minutes past midnight when Marcus Chen saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The corridor stretched ahead, like a tunnel carved from darkness itself. Only the dim security lights along the floor broke the blackness, casting long shadows that climbed the palace walls like fingers reaching upward. Marcus had walked this route hundreds of times during his night shifts. He knew every corner, every echo, every creaking floorboard. But tonight, something was different. His radio crackled softly on his belt. The static was the only company he had on these late rounds through the East Wing. The other guards were stationed at the main entrances, half a building away. Out here, in the oldest section of the palace where tourists never ventured, Marcus was completely alone, or so he thought. He stopped at the junction where the corridor split in two directions. The air felt heavier here, thick and cold, despite the summer heat outside. Marcus pulled his flashlight from his belt and swept the beam across the walls. Portraits of long-dead nobility stared back at him with painted eyes that seemed to follow his movement. That's when he heard it, a sound like fabric dragging across. Stone. Soft. Deliberate. Coming from somewhere down the left corridor, Marcus's pulse quickened. His training kicked in immediately. He pressed the button on his radio. Control, this is Guard 7. Checking possible movement in East Wing, Section 4. Over. The response came through, garbled and weak. Copy. 7. Proceed with caution. He moved forward slowly, his boots barely making a sound on the polished floor. The dragging noise had stopped. Silence pressed against his ears like water. Every instinct told him to call for backup, to wait, to not go forward alone. But he'd worked security for 8 years. He'd investigated dozens of suspicious sounds. They always turned out to be nothing whined through old windows. Pipes settling, birds trapped in the rafters. But this felt different. The corridor seemed to stretch longer than it should. The portraits on the walls became a blur of faces as Marcus walked past them, his flashlight cutting through the darkness ahead. His breath came faster now. The temperature had dropped noticeably. He could see his breath forming small clouds in the beam of his light. Then he saw it at the far end of the corridor, where the hallway turned sharply to the right. Something moved. Not like a person walking. Not like anything natural. It was a darkness that seemed darker than the shadows around it, a shape that didn't quite have edges. It slid along the wall, vertical and impossibly tall. Moving with a fluid motion that made Marcus's stomach twist, he froze. The shadow stopped moving for 3 heartbeats. Nothing happened. Marcus stood perfectly still, his flashlight trained on the spot where he'd seen the shape. The beam showed nothing but an empty corridor and an ornate mirror hanging on the wall at the turn, had he imagined it. The sleep deprivation from double shifts. The stories other guards told about this wing being haunted. Then the shadow moved again. This time it detached from the wall entirely. It stood in the middle of the corridor, a tall, thin silhouette that seemed to absorb the light around it. No features. No face. Just a human-shaped void in the darkness. Marcus's hand shook as he reached for his radio. His mouth had gone completely dry. He tried to speak, but no words came out. The shadow began moving toward him, gliding across the floor without footsteps, without sound. Without any sign of being a living thing, every rational thought in Marcus's mind screamed that this wasn't possible. Shadows didn't move on their own. They didn't have form. They didn't come toward you like predators stalking prey. But this one did, and it was getting closer. Marcus stumbled backward, his flashlight beam cutting wildly across the walls. His training abandoned him completely. This wasn't in any manual. This wasn't an intruder or a threat he could understand. This was something else entirely. The shadow stopped advancing. It stood 20 feet away, perfectly still again. In the silence, Marcus could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. His hand finally found the radio button. Control, I need backup in East Wing immediately. His voice cracked. How could he explain this? There's an intruder. Possible. I need backup now. The radio hissed back. 7. Repeat. You're breaking up badly. Marcus didn't take his eyes off the shadow. It hadn't moved, but somehow it felt like it was watching him. Studying him. The temperature had dropped so low now that his fingers were going numb around the flashlight. Send someone to East Wing Section 4. Right now. He spoke slowly, clearly, fighting to keep his voice steady. No response. Just static. He was completely cut off. The shadow began to change shape. It stretched upward, growing taller, the top of it nearly touching the 15-foot ceiling. Then it compressed, becoming wider, more solid. Marcus watched in frozen horror as it seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like lungs filling with air. A new sound filled the corridor. A whisper. No, multiple whispers, overlapping, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Marcus couldn't make out words, just the sensation of voices speaking in a language he didn't recognize. The sound crawled under his skin and made his teeth ache. He had to move. He couldn't just stand here. Every second felt like the shadow was learning, adapting, deciding what to do with him. Marcus forced his legs to work. He took one step backward, then another. The shadow didn't react. He took 3 more steps, his eyes never leaving that impossible shape. His back hit something solid, and he nearly screamed before realizing it was just the wall behind him. The whispers grew louder. The shadow moved again, but this time it didn't come toward him. Instead, it glided to the side, toward the mirror hanging on the wall. As it approached the reflective surface, Marcus saw something that made his blood turn to ice. The mirror showed the corridor behind the shadow, but in the reflection, there was no shadow at all. The corridor was empty. Marcus blinked hard, certain his eyes were playing tricks. He looked directly at the shadow, solid, dark, undeniably there. Then at the mirror showing nothing but an empty hallway bathed in dim light. The shadow pressed itself against the mirror's surface. For a moment, it flattened completely, becoming two-dimensional, like a painting of darkness on glass. Then it began to sink into the mirror itself, melting through the surface like water through paper. Marcus watched, unable to move, unable to breathe, as the shadow disappeared completely into the reflection. The whispers stopped. The temperature began to rise, and the corridor was suddenly completely empty. He stood there for a full minute, waiting for something else to happen, waiting for the shadow to reappear, waiting for his mind to make sense of what he'd just witnessed. Nothing. Just the normal sounds of an old building at night. The distant hum of ventilation systems. The soft tick of settling wood. His own ragged breathing. Marcus approached the mirror slowly, his flashlight held up like a weapon. The mirror was old, its silver backing tarnished with age, set in an ornate golden frame carved with strange symbols he'd never noticed before. The glass was cold to the touch. Perfectly normal. He angled his flashlight to examine the surface. No cracks, no damage. No sign that anything had just passed through solid matter right before his eyes. But on the bottom corner of the frame, Marcus noticed something. Scratches, deep gouges in the metal that looked fresh, the gold beneath bright and unoxidized. They formed a pattern. Not random damage, but deliberate marks arranged in a way that looked almost like writing. His radio suddenly crackled to life with perfect clarity. "Guard 7, do you copy? What's your status?" Marcus jumped at the sound, his heart rate spiking again. He pressed the button with shaking hands. "Copy. I'm okay." False alarm. Must have been nothing. Even as he said the words, he knew they were a lie. But what was he supposed to report? That he'd seen a living shadow disappear into a mirror? They'd think he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had. Copy that, 7. Check in when you complete your round. Marcus stared at the mirror for another long moment. In the reflection, he could see himself pale, sweating, eyes wide with fear. Behind his reflection, the corridor stretched away into darkness, and somewhere in that darkness, barely visible in the far depths of the mirror, something moved. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that shadow moving toward him, saw it melting into the mirror like something from a nightmare made real. By morning, He'd almost convinced himself it had been exhaustion. Stress. Maybe. Carbon monoxide from old heating systems causing hallucinations. The rational explanations felt thin and unconvincing, but he clung to them anyway. Because the alternative, that what he'd seen was real, was impossible. He reported for his shift that evening with dark circles under his eyes. The other guards noticed immediately. "You look terrible, Chen," said Rodriguez, the senior guard who'd worked the palace for 15 years. "You getting sick?" Marcus shook his head, pouring himself coffee in the security office. "Just didn't sleep well." "You were in the East Wing last night, right?" Rodriguez's tone changed slightly. Section 4. Marcus's hand froze on the coffee pot. "Yeah. Why?" Rodriguez exchanged a glance with Thompson, another veteran guard. Something passed between them, a look Marcus couldn't quite read. Thompson cleared his throat and suddenly became very interested in the monitor screens. "No reason," Rodriguez said carefully. "Just checking." But Marcus knew that tone. He'd heard it before when guards talked about the things they didn't want to officially report. The things that couldn't be explained. "Has something happened in that corridor before?" Marcus asked directly. The room went quiet. Even the normal chatter of radio communications seemed to fade into background noise. Rodriguez sipped his coffee, taking his time before answering. "Look, kid. Every old building has stories. This place has been standing for 300 years. Lots of history. Lots of people have worked here, walked these halls. Some people say they've seen things, especially in the old wings." "What kind of things?" Thompson finally spoke up, his voice low. "Shadows. Figures. Movement where there shouldn't be any." He met Marcus's eyes. "Most people don't talk about it because they don't want to sound crazy. But yeah, the East Wing has a reputation." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. So he wasn't the first. "Why didn't anyone warn me?" "Because for most people, nothing happens," Rodriguez said. "They walk those corridors for years and never see anything unusual. It's random, unpredictable." He set down his coffee cup. "Did you see something last night?" Marcus hesitated. The words were right there, desperate to come out, but saying them out loud would make it real. It would mean accepting that the impossible had happened. "Maybe," he said finally. "I'm not sure." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "The mirror corridor. That's where most of the reports come from. That specific stretch with all the old mirrors and portraits." He pulled out a battered notebook from his desk drawer and flipped through pages covered in cramped handwriting. "I've been keeping track. Unofficial, understand? Can't put this stuff in official reports." Found the page he was looking for and turned it toward Marcus. The entries went back years. Dates, times, brief descriptions. Shadow figure seen near mirror. Cold spot, temperature drop, whispers heard. No source identified. Guard reported feeling watched. The entries were disturbingly similar to what Marcus had experienced. But one entry near the bottom of the page made his blood run cold. Guard Stevens disappeared during patrol. Found unconscious in supply closet 2 hours later. No memory of how he got there. Severe hypothermia, despite summer temperatures. Marcus looked up sharply. "What happened to Stevens?" "Quit the next day," Thompson said quietly. "Wouldn't talk about it. Wouldn't even come back to collect his last paycheck. Had his wife do it?" Rodriguez closed the notebook. "Listen, Marcus. If you want to request a transfer to different patrol routes, no one's going to question it. Lots of guards have. It's not worth the stress." Marcus thought about it. The smart thing would be to say yes, to avoid that corridor, to pretend last night never happened. But something stubborn in him resisted. He'd been a guard for 8 years. He wasn't going to let fear drive him away from doing his job. "I'll think about it," he said. That night, Marcus's route took him through the West Wing instead. He was grateful for the reassignment, even if he'd never admit why. But around 1 in the morning, his radio crackled with an urgent message. "All units, we have a situation. Guest reported seeing an intruder in the East Wing. Guard Patterson is not responding to radio calls. All available units respond immediately." Marcus's heart sank. Patterson was young, only been on the job 6 months, and he'd been assigned to the East Wing tonight. Marcus ran. He reached the mirror corridor in under 3 minutes, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly as he sprinted through the palace. 2 other guards arrived at the same time, all of them breathing hard. The corridor was empty, silent, but the temperature was so cold that their breath fogged in thick clouds. And at the far end, near the mirror, Patterson's flashlight lay on the floor. Still on, casting a circle of light on the ceiling. "Patterson," Marcus called out. His voice echoed strangely, as if the corridor was much larger than it should be. No answer. One of the guards picked up the fallen flashlight. "His radio's here too." "Just dropped on the floor." Marcus approached the mirror slowly. The same mirror where he'd seen the shadow disappear. The carved frame glinted in the flashlight beams, those strange symbols seeming almost to move in the shifting light. And on the glass surface, barely visible, were handprints. Lots of them. Smeared across the mirror from the inside, as if someone had been pressing against the glass from behind it, trying to push through. But mirrors don't have a behind. They're solid. They're glass-backed with silver and nothing more. Marcus reached out with one trembling hand and touched the surface. It was ice cold. And for just a second, just a fraction of a moment, the glass felt soft under his fingers, like pressing against fabric, like pushing against a curtain that hung between worlds. He jerked his hand back. The sensation vanished. The mirror was solid again. "Where's Patterson?" one of the guards asked, his voice rising with panic. "Where the hell is he?" Marcus stared at the handprints on the glass, at the desperate smears of someone trying to escape from somewhere impossible, and then from somewhere that sounded both very far away and right beside them. They heard Patterson scream. The scream came from everywhere and nowhere. It echoed through the corridor, bounced off the walls, seemed to come from inside the very air around them. Patterson's voice unmistakable, filled with pure terror. Then silence. The 3 guards stood frozen, their flashlights darting across the corridor. The other 2 Jenkins and Morels looked at Marcus with wide, frightened eyes. "That was Patterson," Morels whispered. But where Marcus pressed his ear against the mirror, the glass was so cold it burned his skin. He heard something, faint, like sounds traveling through water. Movement, breathing, and underneath it all, those same whispers he'd heard the night before. "He's in there," Marcus said. The words sounded insane even as he spoke them. "He's inside the mirror." "It's impossible," Jenkins said. But his voice shook with doubt. Marcus pulled back and examined the mirror's frame more closely. The symbols carved into the gold were intricate, deliberate, not decorative. They looked old, far older than the palace itself. Some were almost worn away, as if they'd been touched countless times over centuries. "Help me take this down," Marcus said suddenly. "What?" "Chen, we should call this in. We don't have time." Marcus grabbed one side of the frame. "If Patterson's in there somehow, we need to get him out, now." The mirror was massive, at least 7 feet tall and 4 feet wide. It took all 3 of them to lift it off the wall mounts. As soon as it came free, the temperature plummeted even further. Frost began forming on the glass surface. Spreading in crystalline patterns, they lowered it carefully to the floor, angling it against the wall. The back of the mirror should have shown the wooden backing, the frame construction, the mounting hardware. Instead, they saw something impossible. The back of the mirror was another mirror, glass on both sides, reflective surfaces facing away from each other. And in the space between, because somehow there was a space between, they could see movement. Shadows shifting. Shapes that looked almost human but weren't quite right. And Patterson, pressed against the glass from the inside, his hands splayed against the surface, his mouth open in a silent scream. His eyes found Marcus's through the impossible space, and the desperate plea in them was clear. "Get me out." "God," Morales said, backing away. "Oh God, this isn't real. This can't be real," but it was real. Horribly, impossibly real. Marcus knelt beside the mirror. Patterson's face was right there. It's inches away, but separated by glass and whatever terrible space existed within the mirror's depths. Marcus could see the terror in the young guard's eyes, could see his lips moving, forming words they couldn't hear. "Can you break it?" Jenkins asked. Marcus shook his head. "We don't know what would happen. We don't know if that would free him or trap him forever. Behind Patterson, deeper in the mirror's interior space, more shadows moved. The same kind Marcus had seen the night before, tall, dark, moving with that fluid, unnatural motion, and they were getting closer to Patterson. Patterson saw them too. His eyes went wider, and he began pounding on the glass with both fists, his mouth forming the word help over and over. Marcus pressed his hand against the glass where Patterson's hand was. The surface was solid, cold, unyielding. He pushed harder. Willing it to give way like it had for just that brief moment earlier, nothing happened. The symbols, Jenkins said suddenly, pointing at the frame. Look, some of them are different on this side. He was right. The carvings on the back of the frame were a mirror image of the ones on the front, but not exact. Some symbols were reversed. Others were missing entirely. And a few were different shapes, worn almost smooth. Marcus studied them, his mind racing. This wasn't random. This was a mechanism. And locks had keys. The worn ones, he said. These symbols that are almost erased. Someone's been touching them deliberately. For a long time, he pressed his finger to one of the smooth symbols. It was warmer than the rest of the frame, despite the cold radiating from the glass. The moment he touched it, the symbol began to glow with a faint golden light. Patterson stopped pounding on the glass. The shadows in the mirror's depths froze mid-movement. Press the others, Marcus said urgently. The worn symbols. All of them. Jenkins and Morales hesitated only a second before joining him. They found 6 symbols in total that were worn smooth, arranged in a pattern around the frame. As each one was pressed, it began to glow. The whispers grew louder, but different now. Not threatening. Almost like words of an incantation spoken in reverse. When the 6th symbol lit up, the mirror's surface rippled like water. Patterson's hand broke through. Real, solid, flesh and blood. His fingers grasped desperately at the air, at Marcus's sleeve, at anything that meant escape. Marcus grabbed his wrist with both hands and pulled. Jenkins and Morales seized Patterson's other arm as it came through. The shadows in the mirror surged forward. "Pull!" Marcus shouted. They pulled with everything they had. Patterson's shoulders came through the rippling glass, then his head, gasping for air like a drowning man breaking the surface. His torso, his waist. The shadows were right behind him now, reaching with limbs that were too long, too thin, too many. One of them grasped Patterson's leg. He screamed. Marcus planted his feet and yanked with all his strength. There was a sound like tearing fabric, and Patterson came free all at once. The 4 of them tumbled backward onto the corridor floor in a heap. The mirror's surface solidified instantly. The glowing symbols faded, and behind the glass, the shadows pressed against the barrier, their forms distorted and furious, trapped once more. Patterson was sobbing, shaking uncontrollably. His skin was ice cold and he was mumbling incoherently. Marcus pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around the young guard's shoulders. "You're okay," Marcus said, though his own voice was shaking. "You're out. You're safe." But even as he said it, he looked at the mirror lying against the wall, at the shadows still moving within its depths, at the symbols on the frame that had been deliberately placed there centuries ago by someone who knew exactly what this mirror was and what it contained. This wasn't over. This was never going to be over, because whatever existed in that mirror had been here for hundreds of years, and it wasn't going anywhere. The palace was locked down within the hour. Emergency services arrived, along with palace officials and security supervisors Marcus had never seen before. Patterson was taken away in an ambulance, still shaking, still unable to form complete sentences. The mirror was photographed, documented, and covered with a heavy cloth before being carried away by men in suits who didn't identify themselves. Marcus sat in the security office. A blanket around his shoulders and a cup of coffee he couldn't drink growing cold in his hands. Rodriguez sat across from him, his notebook open, pen ready, but he wasn't writing anything down. "Tell me what happened," Rodriguez said quietly. "All of it. The truth." So Marcus did. He told him about the shadow 2 nights ago, about the mirror, about Patterson's disappearance and the impossible rescue. He expected skepticism, disbelief, maybe even laughter. Instead, Rodriguez just nodded slowly, like Marcus was confirming things he already knew. Palace has been hiding this for a long time, Rodriguez said when Marcus finished. Decades, maybe centuries. I didn't know the full extent, but I knew there was something in that corridor. Something wrong. He closed his notebook. They're going to want your silence. Yours and Jenkins and Morales. They'll offer you things. Money, transfers, whatever it takes to keep this quiet. What about Patterson? They'll take care of him. Good medical leave, full pay, probably a generous settlement. He won't talk. After what he experienced, he won't want to remember it exists. Marcus finally took a sip of the cold coffee. It tasted bitter. What is that thing? That mirror? Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. I've been researching for years. Pieces of information, old records, stories passed down between guards. The East Wing wasn't always part of the palace. It was built on the site of something older, much older. Some kind of monastery or temple, depending on which records you believe. He paused. The mirror was here before the palace was built. They built around it. They knew what it was, and they kept it anyway. Why? Because destroying it might be worse than containing it. Rodriguez pulled out another notebook, this one even more worn. I found references in the palace archives. Hidden in maintenance records from the 1800s, workers who tried to remove the mirror, they disappeared. All of them. Just gone. So the palace decided to leave it in place, seal off that corridor, pretend it didn't exist, but people still patrol there, because something has to. Whatever's in that mirror, it's contained as long as people are nearby. As long as it's watched, the moment that corridor is abandoned completely, the shadows start appearing elsewhere in the building. I've tracked the pattern. Every time guards avoid that section for too long, incidents spike in other areas. Shadows in the ballroom. Cold spots in the dining hall. Sounds in the walls. Marcus felt sick. So were prison guards. For something that shouldn't exist? The ones who stand between it and everyone else in this. Building, tourists, staff, officials, hundreds of people every day who have no idea what's beneath their feet. Rodriguez met his eyes. Someone has to know. Someone has to watch. That's what we do. A knock at the door interrupted them. A woman in an expensive suit entered without waiting for an answer. She carried a briefcase and had the kind of authority that filled a room. Mr. Chen? I'm Director Hastings from Palace Historical Preservation. She sat down without being invited and placed a document on the table. I need you to understand that what you experienced tonight is classified under historical protection laws. The details of tonight's incident cannot be shared with anyone outside official channels. This includes family, friends, media, and social media platforms. Marcus stared at the document. It was a non-disclosure agreement, dense with legal language. Is Patterson okay? Marcus asked instead of reaching for the paper. Mr. Patterson is receiving excellent care. He'll make a full recovery. Her tone suggested the conversation was over on that topic. And the mirror is being moved to secure storage where it can be properly contained and studied? Asterisk studied? Marcus couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. That thing traps someone inside an impossible space, and you want to study it? Director Hastings' expression didn't change. The mirror is an irreplaceable historical artifact. It predates the palace by at least 600 years. We have a responsibility to preserve it. It's dangerous, which is precisely why it needs to be contained properly. Signing this agreement ensures that you can continue your employment here with full benefits and a substantial compensation package for your silence. She slid another paper across the table. The number written on it made Marcus's eyes widen. Rodriguez had been right. They were buying silence. Marcus looked at the number, then at Director Hastings, then at Rodriguez, who gave him a slight nod that could have meant anything. Asterisk, he thought about Patterson's terrified face. Pressed against the glass. About the shadows that had tried to hold him in that impossible space. About the fact that this had been happening for centuries and the palace had just covered it up over and over, paying off witnesses and pretending everything was normal? Marcus asked. Your employment would be terminated, effective immediately. You'd also face legal action for breach of confidentiality and potential criminal charges related to theft of historical information. She said it calmly, like she was describing the weather. These are very serious matters, Mr. Chen. I strongly encourage you to sign. Marcus picked up the pen. His hand hovered over the signature line. Everything in him screamed that this was wrong, that covering this up, pretending it didn't happen, was the exact opposite of what should be done. Asterisk, but what was the alternative? Go public. Who would believe him? He'd be labeled crazy, lose his job, maybe worse. And the mirror would still be here, still trapping people, still existing in the darkness while everyone pretended otherwise. At least if he signed, he'd still be here. Still watching, still able to do something if it happened again. He signed the paper. Director Hastings took it, checked the signature and stood. Thank you for your cooperation. You'll find the compensation deposited within 48 hours. Someone will brief you on your new patrol routes. The East Wing will be closed to all security personnel until further notice. She walked to the door, then paused. And Mr. Chen? We appreciate people like you. People who understand that some things are better left in the dark. She left. The door closed with a soft click. Marcus sat in the silence for a long moment. Then he looked at Rodriguez. New patrol routes? Asterisk, they're moving you to the main building. Tourist areas. Daylight shifts, mostly. Rodriguez's expression was sympathetic. They do this with everyone who gets too close. They rotate them out, away from the problem areas, until they forget or convince themselves it was all stress or imagination. Rodriguez smiled sadly. Has it worked for you? Can you forget what you saw? Marcus knew the answer. He'd never forget. Every shadow would make him pause. Every mirror would make him wonder. Every unexplained sound in the night would bring back the memory of that thing gliding toward him in the darkness. What happens to the mirror now? He asked. Rodriguez closed his notebooks and stood. They'll put it in the archives, deep underground, behind locked doors and security systems, and they'll assign guards to watch it, just like they've always done. He put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. The shadows aren't gone, Marcus. They're just waiting. They always are. Asterisk, 6 months passed. Marcus worked his new shifts in the public areas of the palace. Tourists flowed through the grand halls during the day, taking photos, marveling at the architecture, completely unaware of what existed beneath them in the sealed corridors. His nights were quieter now, easier. No shadows, no whispers, no impossible things that defied explanation. The compensation money sat in his bank account, largely untouched. It felt wrong to spend it. It's like accepting payment for forgetting something that should never be forgotten. Patterson never came back to work. Marcus tried calling him once, but the number was disconnected. Rodriguez mentioned hearing he'd moved to another city, started over somewhere far from the palace. Marcus hoped that was true. Hoped Patterson found peace, but Marcus couldn't let it go. In his off hours, he researched. He visited libraries, dug through historical archives, talked to elderly former palace workers under the pretense of casual interest. Piece by piece, he assembled a history that the palace had tried to bury. The mirror was indeed ancient. It appeared in records dating back to the 14th century, though it was certainly older. It had belonged to an order of monks who practiced what they called shadow binding, the containment of malevolent entities in reflective surfaces. The mirror was one of 7 they'd created, each one a prison for something that existed between worlds. The other 6 mirrors had been destroyed over the centuries, deliberately shattered by people who didn't understand what they contained. And every time one broke, the things inside had been released. The records Marcus found were vague about what happened next, but they all used the same phrases: great suffering, many deaths, darkness that walked. The 7th mirror, the one in the palace, was the last one remaining, and it was the strongest, the most secure, built to contain not one shadow, but many. The monks who created it had carved those symbols into the frame as both lock and key. A way to retrieve anyone foolish enough to be taken inside. Marcus learned something else too. The shadows weren't just trapped in the mirror. They were part of it now, woven into its very structure over centuries of containment. Breaking the mirror wouldn't destroy them. It would free them. That's why the palace kept it. Not because they wanted to study it, because destroying it would be catastrophic. Marcus stood in the research library of the Historical Society, a stack of crumbling ledgers in front of him, and felt the weight of that knowledge settle over him like a physical thing. The palace authorities weren't the villains he'd imagined. They were doing the only thing they could, demanding a prison that had to exist, that couldn't be unmade, that required constant vigilance. His phone buzzed. A text from Rodriguez. "Call me. Urgent." Marcus stepped outside and dialed. Rodriguez answered on the first ring. "They're moving the mirror," Rodriguez said without preamble. "Transport is scheduled for tonight. New secure facility, deeper underground, better containment." "Okay," Marcus said slowly. "Why are you telling me?" "Because I need someone I can trust. Someone who's seen what that thing can do. They're asking for volunteer guards to escort the transport." Rodriguez paused. "They asked me. I'm asking you." Marcus closed his eyes. He'd been moved away from the danger specifically to forget, to move on, to let the shadows fade into bad dreams. Going back would mean confronting everything again. It would mean standing next to that mirror, knowing what was inside it, feeling that cold presence. But Rodriguez was right. Who else could do this? Who else understood? "I'll do it," Marcus said. That night, Marcus stood in a basement loading bay he'd never known existed. The mirror, wrapped in heavy cloth and secured in a custom steel frame, rested on a reinforced trolley. 4 guards had been selected for the escort. Rodriguez, Marcus, and 2 others, Williams and Chen. Veterans who Rodriguez vouched for. Director Hastings was there too, overseeing the operation with the same clinical efficiency she'd shown 6 months ago. The route is clear. Security has swept every corridor. The new facility is waiting. This should be a simple transfer. They began moving the mirror through the underground passages. The wheels of the trolley squeaked softly on the concrete floor. Their flashlights cut through the darkness ahead. The walls down here were old stone, part of the original foundation that predated the palace itself. Marcus felt the cold before they'd gone 50 feet. That same unnatural chill that seeped into bones. The cloth covering the mirror shifted slightly, though there was no breeze. "It knows it's being moved," Rodriguez said quietly. "Mirrors don't know things," Williams muttered. But his voice lacked conviction. They kept moving. The passage stretched ahead, seeming to grow longer with each step. Marcus's breath fogged in the freezing air. Behind them, the lights they'd passed began to flicker, then go out. "Keep moving," Director Hastings ordered. But there was tension in her voice now. "We're almost there." The whispers started, soft at first, then growing louder. Coming from the mirror, from the walls, from everywhere. Marcus tightened his grip on the trolley. His knuckles were white. Something moved in the darkness ahead. Not a shadow this time. A figure, humanoid but wrong. Tall and thin, limbs that bent at too many angles. A face that was more suggestion than form. The figure stepped into their flashlight. Beams and Marcus's blood turned to ice. It was Patterson, or something wearing Patterson's face. The features were right, but the eyes were hollow, black, reflecting no light. And behind him, more figures emerged from the shadows. Guards who had disappeared over the years. Stevens. Others Marcus didn't recognize. All of them with those same empty eyes. "They're not real," Rodriguez said. But he'd stopped pushing the trolley. They all had asterisk. The Patterson thing tilted its head. "We're as real as you are." Its voice was Patterson's voice layered with the whispers, speaking in unison with itself. "We were taken, changed, made into something new." "Patterson," Marcus said, forcing the words out. "If you're still in there, he is. We all are. Pieces of who we were, mixed with pieces of what we've become." The thing smiled with Patterson's mouth. The mirror doesn't trap. It transforms. It offers something you could never find in your world. Ah, it's lying, Director Hastings said sharply. These are projections. Illusions meant to stop us. Keep moving. But Marcus couldn't. Because the Patterson thing was looking at him with something like pity. You saved me from the mirror, Marcus. Pulled me out before the transformation completed. I thanked you then. The thing stepped closer. But I spent 3 hours in that place. 3 hours walking between worlds, seeing things you can't imagine. And part of me wishes you'd left me there. Marcus shook his head. No. Whatever that place showed you, it wasn't real. It was more real than this. Patterson gestured at the concrete walls, the metal trolley, the mundane reality around them. The shadows aren't monsters, Marcus. They're explorers, refugees, things that found a way to exist between one reality and another. And the mirror is their door. The other figures moved forward, surrounding them. Williams raised his flashlight like a weapon. Chen pulled out his radio, but it only emitted static. The palace has been imprisoning them for centuries. The Patterson thing continued. Keeping them locked away because humanity fears what it doesn't understand? But what if I told you they don't want to harm anyone? What if I told you they just want to be free? Marcus looked at the covered mirror, at the figures surrounding them, at Rodriguez, whose hand had moved to the symbols on the frame, ready to activate them if needed. If they just want freedom, Marcus said carefully, then why did they try to keep Patterson trapped? Why did they drag people inside? The Patterson thing's smile faded. For a moment, something flickered in those black eyes. Pain, regret, truth, because it said quietly being between worlds is lonely. And the shadows want company. Rodriguez pressed the first symbol. Golden light flared. The Patterson thing screamed a sound of rage and anguish, and something that might have been relief. It and all the other figures dissolved into smoke, pulled back into the mirror like water flowing downhill. They ran. The trolley rattled and shook as they pushed it faster through the passages. The lights behind them exploded one by one. The whispers became shrieks. The temperature dropped so low that ice formed on the walls, on their clothes, on the metal frame holding the mirror. Director Hastings led them through a final door into a large chamber. Heavy steel, thick walls, symbols carved into every surface, the same symbols from the mirror's frame repeated thousands of times. They wheeled the mirror to the center of the room where mounting brackets waited. Together, the 4 guards lifted it into place and secured it. Rodriguez activated the symbols on the frame in a specific sequence. The chamber's own carvings began to glow in response. The shrieks cut off instantly. The cold faded. The mirror was contained. Marcus stood there, breathing hard, staring at the cloth-covered surface. Somewhere behind that fabric, Patterson's echo still existed, and Stephen's. And who knew how many others across the centuries? It's done, Director Hastings said. She looked exhausted. This facility will hold it. Nothing gets in. Nothing gets out. Marcus hoped she was right. But he'd learned that hope and certainty were very different things. Rodriguez put a hand on his shoulder. You did good, kid. You can walk away now. Live your life. Let someone else watch the shadows. Marcus looked at the mirror one last time. At the symbols glowing on the walls. At the door that would seal this chamber away from the world above. Someone has to watch, he said, echoing Rodriguez's words from months ago. Someone has to remember what's down here. Rodriguez smiled sadly. Yeah, someone does. They left the chamber together. The heavy door closed behind them with a final, decisive thud. Locks engaged. Security systems activated. And somewhere far above, tourists would walk through the palace tomorrow, taking photos and buying souvenirs, never knowing what slept beneath their feet. Marcus walked out into the night air. The stars were clear overhead. The city lights glowed in the distance. Everything looked normal, beautiful, real. But he knew the truth now. Knew that beneath the normal world, in the dark spaces where nobody looked, impossible things existed. Things that were trapped because they had to be. Things that waited with endless patience for their moment to be free. And he knew that someone would always have to stand guard. Someone would always have to watch. Someone would always have to be willing to stare into the darkness and make sure the darkness didn't stare back. It was a burden, a responsibility, a choice. Marcus had made his choice. He was one of the watchers now, and he would never stop watching.